Hello, and welcome to The Public Square, a show that explores public affairs and religious liberty issues that affect our nation and beyond. I'm your host, Paul Goodridge, and I'm the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for for the South Central Conference of Seventh-day Adventists located in Nashville, Tennessee. In each episode, we'll talk to people who are on the front lines in the fight for civil and religious liberty. Our goal for each show is to inform about issues affecting everyday life, ignite meaningful thought and conversation, inspire my audience to action, and integrate faith principles in what we discuss. Today's show is entitled The State of the United States. And we're going to be talking to individuals and with individuals, assessing where we are here in the United States, both physically, where we are politically, where we are prophetically, where we are culturally, where we are in terms of health and issues and society. We have a great panel of experts who will be joining me. And we welcome your comments, we welcome your questions, we welcome your feedback. In fact, I want to encourage you now to go ahead, if you're watching on our YouTube or Facebook platforms, to go ahead and subscribe to this podcast so that as our shows air, you can be notified when we're going to go on air. So, again, thank you for joining me, and let's meet in the public square. So, I'm joined today by a number of individuals. I'm proud to call these individuals colleagues. And so, first of all, I'm going to begin with Orland Johnson. Orland Johnson serves as I'm doing it out of order based on the screen that I see. So, forgive me for that. But Orland Johnson serves as the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for the North American Division of Seventh day Adventists. He is an attorney by profession, but he brings years of experience to the field of public affairs and religious liberty. Ornan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Looking forward.
All right. Then we have Dr. Dedrick Blue. Dr. Dedrick Blue currently serves as the Ministerial Secretary for the Northeastern Conference of Seventh day Adventists. He has formerly served as the Dean for the uh, Department of Religion here at Oakwood University, as well as a pastor within the Northeastern Conference. Dr. Blue, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be with you.
All right. Then we also have Dr. Marcia Burden Tiggs. Dr. Burden Tiggs and Dr. Marcia, forgive me. I'm about to butcher your title and introduction. So I'm gonna ask you to save face for me and just share with us your title and where you're currently serving.
Yes, I also have a legal background, but I'm currently serving at Oakwood University as the pre-law program, legal studies program, and honors program director and associate professor.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And then, last but certainly not least, Dr. Trisha Pennycook. And I'm also going to butcher your title, so please allow me to save face by letting us know where you serve and what your current position is.
Thank you, Pastor Goodrich. I am currently the Vice Dean for Faculty and Global Affairs at the University of South Florida College of Public Health. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, thank you, thank you. And I know you have a vast background in public health. And so we're going to rely on your expertise. All right, I want to jump right in here. I want to jump right in. And I'm going to ask each of you to answer the question. Um, if you can fill in the blank and then give maybe a two-sentence explanation as to why you chose the word that you chose. And the phrase is, in my opinion, the state of the United States is blank, and then give a two-sentence explanation of your opinion. And so I'm going to begin with the first person on my screen, which is Dr. Blue. How would you describe the state of the United States?
I think the state of the United States is tenuous.
Mm,
And I say tenuous because I believe that our democracy is at threat. We see threats to our constitutional democracy right now. And so that's why I choose the word tenuous.
okay, okay.
Two
We'll ask you to unpack that a little bit, a little bit later. Dr. Burden Tiggs, the state of the United States, in your opinion?
I would say is chaotic.
Mm,
And I choose that term because right now there is no clear vision. There is nothing but uncertainty. There is nothing but blaming, back and forth. There's no consensus on too much of anything. And so it's just a sense, it's just chaos. So I choose chaotic.
okay,
Mm.
okay. Um, Attorney Johnson, in your opinion, the state of the United States?
I would say, Paul, that it is confused.
Mm,
It's a country right now that can't tell, and I'll use one of my taglines, if their faith should shape their politics or if their politics should be shaping their faith.
mm, mm. Okay, okay. Dr. Pennycook, yeah, in your
He took
opinion.
my word. He took my word.
Glad I went third. Glad I went third.
That's what happens when you go last. So I'm going to say the same word, confusing, but I'm going to give another reason.
Okay.
So I think that it is confusing for our young people who are trying to understand, many of them, the first time they're getting to the opportunity to vote, to know exactly, who to vote for. They do not see a lot of differences, and there's a lack of clarity. It's confusing for people around the world who are not living in the United States but are watching it from the outside and wondering what happened.
Mm,
And it is confusing for those of us who are trying to teach young people and prepare the workforce and to be able to exemplify and model leadership when there is such a lack of it when we're looking at what's happening across the stage.
okay, okay. Well, let's dive in there because you brought up in terms of politics, and so let's look at the world of politics now. Understand? Let me kind of give a little disclaimer. We're not really talking about. I don't want us to focus on people. I want us to focus on principles and policies, etc. But that being said, what I what I let me just put it out there. When I was putting together this show, and the date, we normally do it the second Thursday of every month, and so it was going to be the date where Donald Trump would have been sentenced based on his current conviction. And so I thought that would really, shape the show. But little did I know, a month later, that really the focus would not necessarily be on Donald Trump, but would be on Joe Biden and his um, uh, the tenuous position of his candidacy as president, in terms of his, the question of his fitness, the question of his, mental ability, and in both candidates, the question of their age. So when we look at the political landscape, there is a lot of uncertainty. Orlan, how can you how can we kind of get a clearer picture of what's going on politically?
Well, I would say that what we have going on politically is we have two primary parties who have standard bearers that are flawed. And when you start off your what I would call political dialogue with the fact that no side seems to be able to come to the table for, lack of a better term, clean hands, then it puts you in a situation where you find yourself sometimes having to pick the lesser of two evils as opposed to trying to select who you think would be the best person in terms of running the country. But I would kind of augment that by saying that we've gotten to a point where, in my opinion, the most talented people who can do these types of jobs do not want to get in the game
mm,
because of all of what goes on with it. So when you sit back and say, how did we end up with who we have? It's because some of those who are more talented do not want to play the games that are required in order to be successful. And as a result, until we can get a better handle on what we really want to see in leadership and try to ensure that politics is not simply about winning, losing, or decimating the other person, I think what we're going to see is a lack of talent really trying to lead what we generally used to call the leader of the free world, as opposed to individuals who enjoy the entertainment and the fun of it
mm,
all, as opposed to understanding that being president of the United States and really being in leadership from political standpoint is a responsibility as opposed to what some people, in my opinion, are viewing it as a birthright.
mm, mm, mm. So what do you think, Dr. Bird and Tiggs? What do you think, in light of this is an election year? What are the stakes that you see as far as the country, in terms of whether the Republicans win the election or the Democrats win the election?
Um, and see, that's a great question because I believe the stakes are higher than ever before. And that's what's so alarming because I don't think everybody else believes that. I
Mm,
mean, right now we're in the battle of the geriatrics. When did we ever
mm,
think we were going to actually get here? Right? To Attorney Johnson's point, how did our country get here? When we look at the history and the trajectory of presidential candidates, we're not seeing the ages that we're seeing now. We're also not seeing this stigma affiliated with presidential candidacy, with senators, with governors, mayors on all levels. Media has literally transformed how we view politics and how we
yeah.
consider it today. So voting is extremely high. Whoever takes control over all of the power, they are going to push their agenda. But the question is the agenda in the good of the United States of America, or is it just for a certain group of people? Is it for all people? Is it going to create certain groups as outcasts? Is it going to help people? Is it going to make us, instead of having a middle class, to having the poor and the 1%? So all of these things are on the line and at stake. And unfortunately, what's sad about it is that we can't even take the constitutional perspective of what these positions should be and how they should operate. We literally have parties dictating the narrative and extremists actually taking the forefront of what should be something that is more balanced and more
Hmm.
reasonable. It's just like the extremists have taken over and created this monster, and the media has projected politics into this, morphs into this thing that it is just, it's awful. It's awful right now. So we're in trouble.
Mm,
Mm.
If
mm,
I may, I think that not everybody understands that what we're voting for is agendas and not people.
mhm,
Correct.
And as long as people keep looking at this as two people that are vying for the oval, that's the shiny mirror. What comes behind those two people is their agendas, their worldview, their approach, their respect for what this country stands for, how it was founded, who should have the ability to say what happens. Is it who has the money? Is it the ones who have the numbers? There's so much behind these two people. And because they are
Mhm.
so special in the way they are, they're not normal people. They're not great people. They're very colorful people. The press has made them into almost caricatures of people. Then we're all looking at the people, the persons, and we are not necessarily looking at the agendas. And
Mm.
once the person is voted into office, what happens next is the agenda. It doesn't matter what who that person is. Once that
Right.
person is voted in, the ones who wrote the agenda are the ones who run the country. And I don't think we're spending enough time talking about those agendas so that people, especially our young people, understand what they're voting for, and they're getting stuck on people missing sentences and mumbling words, or being extravagant or feeling powerful, and not looking at what the agenda items are that are propelling these people to the front.
Yeah. Well,
A lot.
I would have to agree with you, Tricia, 100%. For me, I, I'm not so perplexed as other people are, because there is one candidate who is very explicit about his agenda and about the takeover of the country, about declaring that he wants to be a dictator, about being a convicted felon, about being a convicted sex offender, about ratcheting up the base that talks about violence and the complete takeover of the government on day one, who talks about the abolition of the Constitution of the United States and using the Justice Department as a weapon. And so I think you're right that the media has a tendency to turn this into WWE, right?
Mm.
Who's gonna it's gonna be a smackdown. I'm
Yeah.
not concerned about the smackdown. I'm concerned, like you say, about policies and about issues. And for me, as a Seventh-day Adventist, right, and as a black man, the issue of civil rights and religious liberty is on the table. And when it comes to that, I'm clear as a bell as to which side tends to be more attuned to my issues.
Yeah.
So let me drill down on that a little bit. And Orlan, if you can help us with this.
Sure.
When we look at the two sides, Republican, Democrat, when we look at their agendas, in kind of in a nutshell, Orlan, can you kind of educate me and some of our audience as well? What are the two prevailing schools of thought as far as the agenda for the on the Republican side, on the Democratic side?
Well, I think the schools of thought on what the agendas are, in my opinion, are a little bit confusing. And the reason I say that is because there was a time where you would say, okay, well, the Republican Party is a party that's looking to ensure that, it has a conservative agenda. There should be limitation on taxation of individuals. They're going to always be looking out for religious freedom, and so there was this idea that then if you're on the quote unquote democratic side, it's supposed to be a group that's more concerned with social policies, looking out for what I would call individuals as opposed to corporate interests, being willing to probably ensure that there would be some more taxes if it was going to be taking care of people and institutions that were in need in a very substantial way. Uh, the issues that I see, though, is that, for example, you have some of these agendas that get codified. Like we've been hearing a lot about this Project 2025, but yet
Mhm.
the standard bearer for that party is now claiming that I'm not even sure I even know what that is. I'm not really a part of that, and so the
Right.
confusion thing is on one side you look like this is supposed to be the agenda, then somebody who's supposed to be the standard bearer for the agenda says I don't even know anything about that agenda, and that's part of the confusion I think in this almost what I would call a 24-hour news cycle in which you have to have something to say whether it's true or not.
So you mentioned Project 2025. Just fill us in briefly in terms of what exactly that is.
Sure, it's a project that was put in place by the Heritage Foundation. in which they wanted to create what I would call a checklist of what they would like to see happen from a conservative political standpoint. There are a few specific items on the agenda regarding the disbanding of the Department of Education, really having the President of the United States have more power as it relates to the Justice Department, trying to ensure that there's some specific rules and regulations as it relates to immigration, also ensuring that organizations like the FBI should either be shrunk or done away with. It's basically a policy, in my opinion, very similar to what Dr. Blue was mentioning, is really chipping away at the concept of democracy and
Mhm.
really trying to lean more into an autocratic society, which it was always my understanding that's not what America was supposed to be about. But ironically, Paul, there would be a time that if somebody did lay this whole list out on the paper, that somebody would look back and say, "You must be insane to think that the American
Mhm.
people would ever go for it." But we're now in a stage of politics where, in my opinion, everybody's willing to push the edge of the envelope because they're not sure that may not get through anyway. And I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah.
where we are. You're willing to roll the dice because you've seen some bad hands that have won, and now your thought is maybe I can win with this bad hand, and that's where we seem to be from a political standpoint.
Another thing about this Project 2025, in terms of the effect that it's trying to have on the federal government, in terms of specifically appointing individuals who, for want of a better word, pledge loyalty to the president and will be pushing and promoting the president's agenda. But Dr. Blue,
Yes.
as you said, and I think also Dr. Pennicook, this is not about the president, because once the person is in office, then it's about pushing the
Yeah.
party's agenda.
Correct.
And so I think that's something that we need to be clear about, in terms of when you really look at that 900 odd page document, and really look into some of the things. I was scanning it today, and even with the um, uh, manifesto, so to speak, from the Department of from HUD, Housing and Urban Development, which
Mhm.
was authored by Dr. Ben Carson. It's
Yeah.
talking about, again, the push to make almost force people. I don't want to put words into the mouth, but force people to become self-sufficient. That is the word that is in the document. Force
Okay.
people towards self-sufficiency. With the, I guess, with that understanding, everybody should pull themselves up from their own bootstraps, so to speak. So it really is touching every aspect of life. And Dr. Pennicook, as not only a physician, but also somebody in terms of public health, um, the attempts that we have seen in terms of the abortion ban, and even just legislating people's health, it's very much at the forefront. So it's
Mm. I remember I want to say 24, 25 years old. I
mhm,
had just finished school, medical school. I was staying at a friend's house, my age, but a older lady who was a friend of the family took me out to do some shopping or something. And we were talking about abortion. Somehow the abortion conversation came up. And I was very, life is life. God created us. And she was quiet. And I listen to quiet places because there's usually something powerful coming right after that quiet. And she said, "What you need to understand is that rights are rights. And that when they take away one that you agree with, they may take away another that's yours."
mhm,
And I never forgot that. And I
Mm.
believe that one of the failures that we may have is not making so clear to everyone as a church that choice was so important to God that he was willing to risk the life of his son so that human beings could have it.
Mhm.
He could have put the angel with the sword in front of the tree of the knowledge and evil before Eve went over there. He decided not to because we have choice. And
Yes.
I'm not getting into the abortion, pro life, or pro choice argument right now as an argument. I'm
Hmm.
Hmm.
just saying that choice in itself, taking away someone's ability to choose anything, is risky. And we're seeing how it's growing. So now we started one way, and then we see commandments being placed in the walls of schools, and Christian people making sure that we see that that's good news. But then what does that mean in regards to when they come for what you believe in that may be different than what others believe? It's like a slippery slope.
Hmm.
In regards
Absolutely.
to the abortion itself, the matter of health itself, what we do not always understand is that the physicians who, and the healthcare providers in general, who have to make these decisions with women, do not only make them with women who decide that abortion is a method of family planning, of birth control. They are making these decisions with women who cannot have this labor because they will die. They're making it with decisions with women whose baby was implanted, didn't get all the way to the uterus, got stuck on the way. And if it keeps growing where it is, it will explode and that woman will die. And when you say, unless it is endangering the woman's life, that definition of when there's danger to life is so specific that, and you're telling people you're going to go to jail if you intervene, you're putting at risk the lives of women in general. And when you put the lives of women at risk, you put the life of the family at risk, because that woman, even though she may not have other children, which she could, she has husbands, brothers, sisters, parents that she's helping to take care of. And when you eliminate this access to quality health care, which is the real discussion here,
Hmm.
from women, then you're
Hmm.
eliminating that access for the entire community. And that is where the problem is. And that is where some of us believe the end goal is. It's not just about the women, it's about the endangering of the entire community. And what are we going to do about that? Are we going to sit here and pray about it? Are we going to walk about it? Are we going to
Hmm.
vote about it? Are we going to teach about it? What are we going to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Paul, one of the things, I just want to jump in as
Please.
Dr. Pennicook was making her points is that sometimes as a church and in those who view themselves as being part of a religious organization, sometimes you feel that your expression of what you believe should not be in the public square. When we start talking about the idea of the separation of church and state, to me, that's very different than the separation, of religion and government. Because
Hmm.
religion and government are always going to be tied together. Church and state should be separate. But I also like to let individuals who I know, in particular those who have the same faith that I am, that when your voice is not in the public square, they're missing something. And
Yeah.
when your voice is not there, you don't allow the true shaping of a community to take place in a way that really benefits your community. And so, when you stay out of that marketplace, then you find yourself in a position where you end up just having to settle for what shows up. When part of what I believe God has told us is to be the head and not the tail, well, it's impossible to be the head if you never show up at the head table.
Mm.
I like to tell people all the time, you're either at the table or you're on the menu. And the question is, you're always better at the table than you are on the menu.
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and if I can jump in as well, because I second that. I don't like the fact that, especially within our denomination, the government, politics, the law, knowledge is seen as negative. It seems as bad. Oh, you're an attorney. That's awful. You're a liar. No, no. I need to be an attorney because guess what? That day is coming where my rights and liberties will be tested, and if I who believe in the Seventh Adventist message, who believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, am not informed about what's happening, then how can I represent this group of people? Why would I want an outsider who doesn't understand what is happening, as all of the foolishness going around that, oh, I'm an occult or something? Why would I want somebody that thinks that to be my representative? But when we look at the life of Jesus Christ, Jesus did not stay away from the people that were in charge. Jesus
That's
did
right.
not stay away from the leaders. Jesus actually went into their spaces and spoke truth in such a way that they couldn't even refute it. And so why, and let's take it a step further. Jesus is our ultimate advocate. We're on trial right now as sinners. So it's this concept that baffles me as to why there has to be a separation from knowledge and being in these spaces when this is exactly what Jesus did. And if we're to be Christ followers, this is the place and the space that we're in. So I think, Pastor Gerber, what you're saying and what we're doing right now is so pivotal because we should be leading in these conversations, leading people to truth so that they
Mhm.
will not act out of ignorance, so that young people, so that people of every race and culture and faith will understand you have rights, you have liberties, you should know about them, and you should protect yourself and others from the violence of the enemy.
Yeah,
So,
Amen.
so let me so let me drill down on this a little bit. And especially in terms of Orlan, with the work that you do in terms of public affairs and religious liberty from the North American Division, and within
Hmm.
your office, you are liaising with government, et cetera, and
Absolutely.
politicians. Um,
Absolutely.
so you hear this idea of, well, I'm a Seventh Day Adventist, and
Hmm.
so I should only fight for those things that I believe as Seventh Day Adventists. And so even in the idea of Sabbath keeping and Sabbath accommodations, um, I'm not going to support somebody who is trying to get a religious accommodation to not work on Sunday because Sunday is not a Sabbath anyway. And so, that type of thing. But Olin, what's the flawed thinking in this, especially when it comes to our group, the Seventh Day Adventists, which makes up, and you can give me the specific number of the population, as opposed to other groups. When you bring legislation, when you bring court cases,
Sure.
etc.
Well, I would just say that one of the things that we have to do that sometimes is difficult for members to understand is we actually have to build coalitions in order to be successful.
Mm,
I like to tell people on a regular basis we have about 1 million Adventists in the United States. However, there's about 8 million Mormon. There are about 30 million Southern Baptists. There are about 90 million Catholic. There are about 6 million Methodists. There are about 7 million Presbyterians. And let me get back to our number, 1 million.
mm,
In other words, the numbers don't play out for us if we try to play this game on our own. And if you try to play on your own and they all decide what day they think there should be Sabbath, they're not picking sundown Friday to sundown Sabbath. So part of what we have to be able to do is to go out and to work in conjunction with coalitions in order to be successful. Because at the end of the day, injustice for one is injustice for all. And I can also say this, Paul, as somebody who's working at the division level, it doesn't matter what statement we ever make from the division regarding anything, half the people are going to be mad. No matter what I say, if I say go this direction, half the church is mad. If we decide to go the other direction, half the church is mad because we're not a monolithic group of people. Therefore, part of the work that we have to do is with the idea that we're looking out for the interests of our church as a whole and trying not to play whether or not you're on the left side of the table or the right side of the table. I'm trying to be on God's side of the table. And so that's the primary focus that we are trying to really work on. And then reminding individuals on a regular basis that Politics and your faith can peacefully coexist. But when you decide to engage in it in one of those methods where whoever disagrees with me is not just the enemy, they're the devil,
Mm.
then we've gone way too far in how we are looking at things. And that's why when I talked about there being confusion, and I said that people are confused about whether their faith should shape their politics or should their politics shape their faith, what we're seeing is too many Christians trying to allow their politics to shape their faith, as opposed to allowing, if you want to be quote unquote more like Jesus, allowing that to shape what else you do. So trying to
Mhm.
figure out how to represent an institution when the membership of the institution have very diverse points of view is difficult. However, we have to call things the way we see it. And just real quick, Paul, I just want to make one other statement. So we
Mhm.
were working one time on the Respect for Marriage Act. And what we were working towards is trying to get language in there to make sure that we would protect the church. But a lot of the membership would see that we were involved in the Respect for Marriage Act, and the accusation was, well, why are you there working to strengthen same sex marriages and things of that institution? And we were saying, no, 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 that's not our role here. What we're trying to do here is to make sure that when this does get down and completed, that there's a protection for us. Most people never caught that nuance, to the point that when it was all said and done, the White House and other members of the Senate who really helped us asked us to come to be part of the bill signing, and we told them we cannot show up because our church members would never understand why we're there. That
Mm.
nuanced activity that you have to do in order to really get the job done, so few people really understand it. And therefore, you've got to kind of jump out there and do the job, but understand somebody's probably going to be swinging for your head while you're there.
Mercy.
But then that begs, if
Well, that,
pardon me, but that begs the question. We have young people being trained in our institutions in this country, all across the world, and if we're not talking about these things with them, who are they talking to?
You're right.
Because at some point, they are members on the day they go to church, but they live the rest of their lives every day. And when are we educating them so they understand that when you go into that space, what you're doing, and you don't have to be hiding from being visible in making a difference in people's lives just because people won't understand? When will it become time for the church to understand? And who's supposed to help the church understand what it's supposed to understand?
Doc
Well,
Blue, I know you're trying to
can I
jump in,
jump
so
in?
please
Just
yeah,
go
jump
you
in.
can.
ahead.
A second. Because this is a fascinating conversation. I think one of the challenges as we talk about religion and faith and where we are as Adventists, one thing that we have forgotten sort of our historic roots as Adventists. I mean, our early Adventist pioneers were very much engaged in discussion of the issues of the day. You know, our first GC president had a station in the Underground Railroad. You know, John Andrews and his assessment of the United States of America in terms of Revelation 13, called America a hypocritical nation, two-faced beast because of slavery. And so they were very much engaged and involved. And somehow along the way, I think that our pulpits have become a little bit insipid, and our doctrinal understandings of who we are has sort of strayed a little bit, so that now we're actually afraid to have those kind of serious and meaningful dialogues. And yeah, Orland, I agree with you. You know, our faith ought to inform our politics and not the other way around. So as a 7 Day Adventist, we ought to be able to speak with moral clarity on the issues of the day. We ought to be able to speak with a certain amount of authority, based upon our understanding of the Word of God, with respect unto others, right? Understanding
Yes,
that we have to
absolutely.
protect, yeah, we got to protect our rights, yeah, but we have to protect the rights of all people. And sometimes I hear Adventists who are so much concerned about protecting our right to make sure that we worship on Sabbath that they are absolutely willing to take away everybody else's right, no
Mm.
matter what that right is. But the two are inextricably linked together. Civil and religious liberties cannot be separated in our Constitution. An attack upon your civil liberties is an attack upon your religious liberty, because it doesn't matter. God says, James says, whoever violates one has violated all. So in other words, it doesn't matter if you slap God one time or if you slap him 10 times, the fact is that you slapped him. Doesn't matter if you chip away at one part of the Constitution or the other part of the Constitution, you have chipped away at that fundamental right of liberty that protects us all.
So let me ask the question then. Um, should we then not all be Christian nationalists? Lifting up our Christian heritage, etc., but also protecting the country in terms of.
Nationalism is
Um,
Christian nationalism is not Christianity.
There we,
Christian
tell us what it
there
is.
we go.
Give
Thank
us a
you.
definition. There are some people. There are some people who don't know what Christian are. They hear it, but they don't know what it is. So
Well,
please
well,
enlighten us.
let me just give a base foundation. Then I'm gonna pass it off because we have several attorneys on the line here, right? But
Yeah,
but
one recovering attorney, but yeah, go
re-
ahead, please.
a recovering attorney. But Christian nationalism is not Christianity at all. It really has its base in American mythology, right? When I say it's based in American mythology, the mythology of America being the New Jerusalem, that city set upon the hill, that new Israel, that just as Israel crossed the Jordan, so it is that the founding fathers came here and crossed the Atlantic to create this new land of opportunity. But this was never who we are. We are not God's chosen nation. This is just a nation, right? And the American mythology goes so far as to say, and by the way, we still practice this American mythology in our Adventist theology as well, in terms of saying in Revelation 13, America is this nation that rose up from the earth, meaning it rose non-populated lands. No, there were people already here. Let's be clear about that, right? This was not a
Yes.
blank land. There were people who were already here, and whoever came here displaced them. But in the American mythology, right, this mythology of white supremacy, it has dominated the thinking, and it has somehow merged itself with religion, and Christianity has wrapped itself in the flag. So we have this foundation. This thing has existed from the beginning of the founding of our nation. It has continued on down. When Ellen White talked about it, she talked about the Sunday movement. Essentially, we're talking about the same thing. This amalgamation of this twisted American mythology as religion that now finds itself remanifesting again as Christian nationalism. So
Mm.
I'll stop there and let my learned attorney.
So,
I mean,
we have Clifton. Sorry, but I just wanted to point out Clifton McMillan is giving you an amen in terms of the discussion. Go ahead, Dr. Tiggs.
I want to say that people got to understand you're 100% correct. People want to take words and phrases and put maybe original meaning to them. But when we look at our country, there is no originality in any of the words and phrases that we currently hear. It is a science that was created by the
Mm,
people who came into this country, founded upon, which is the irony of it all, some of the principles that they quote unquote were leaving from and manifested into something that was even worse than what they left. I think about Arthur Coates when he says that race is the child of racism, not the father. And so you're talking about a principle, Christian. You hear the term Christian, and you're like, yes, that's what I am. But Christian nationalism is a science. It is a theory that was created that's not founded on anything that
mm,
is of the Lord Jesus Christ at all, but is proposed to be that way. And that's just how the devil is. He's deceptive, right? He's not going to change and recreate and reproduce. He's going to have that one little thing that everything else looks great, but it's that one thing that is off, and even the very elect will be deceived. And so these terminologies and these phrases are being used because this was a science that was created by some of the people who immigrated into this country that correctly said stole the land from the
mhm,
people that were currently here. And now we're using these terms, Christian nationalism, race, whiteness, white supremacy. All of these terms have a scientific background that people don't understand that they do.
mm,
Well, and I think Marcia is right on point, and Dr. Blue, I think the nomenclature of Christian nationalism in and of itself is to create, I guess, what Dr. Pennycook and I were talking about, the confusion in our nation. Because you
Mhm.
hear the word Christian and it sounds like something you should be able to easily attach yourself to. You hear the concept of nationalism or patriotism, which should be something you can easily attach yourself to. But the
Mhm.
problem is the combination of both of these, what I would call, benign words, have
Yeah.
a very destructive meaning when in place, to the point that most Christians now are asking that the phraseology be more of religious nationalism because of the negativity that's attached to the whole concept that now is almost, juxtaposed against Christianity. And so,
Correct.
even the idea of how to create the confusion is in the use of words that generally have what I would call a lamb like character. But the combination of both of these lamb like characters turns into a beast, which becomes, something that you can attach to it, whatever you feel like, depending on what works for you. We're a society now that likes to create our own religion that fits what we feel like doing. And because of the way our country is set up, where you cannot quote unquote, push back against anyone's religious beliefs, people create things that they tag the title of religion to and expect society to wrap themselves around it now. And I think what's happening is people are trying to take advantage of, the protections that we have in this country and utilizing it more as a sword instead of a shield. And I think that's also part of the confusion that we're dealing with on a daily basis.
I want to address a question or put the question that Dr. Rory Richards asked. It says, so can we say Christian nationalism sees America as a religion? Does it advocate for an American theocracy?
No. Unless that God is a person,
Mm,
I mean, I would say to
because
some degree, yes, that's what there's a group that would like for us to believe that Christian nationalism is this making our country more Christ like per se, or more religious per se, because the idea of religion is generally has what I would call a positive connotation to it. What a lot of people don't talk about is some of the negativity that came when religious organizations were basically almost running the world, to the point where government actually had to get more powerful because Christianity and other religious groups had gotten to the point where they were no longer looking out for the best interests of the people. And so, that's part of why we ended up where we are, today. But I think the idea that Congress is not supposed to be creating any laws that's either going to be creating a religion or really, what I would call depressing any religious group, it's still the role that we need to play. But people are learning how to operate on the fringes. And that's why we're finding ourselves, with folk who are coming up with those type of arguments. Because, what we're seeing is basically just legal arguments are being made on a regular basis and forcing a court to come to a
I got a
decision.
question. Portland, I got a question, right?
Yeah.
And maybe some of y'all can help me with this question. About this whole idea of an American theocracy, and we see what is transpiring right now in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court
Mm-hmm.
seems to be pretty much on a religious agenda and is chipping away.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? I mean, I'm asking the question because I really truly don't know. Is it possible um, um, that the Supreme Court is actually actively helping to facilitate the American democracy to the detriment of the American democracy,
American theocracy to the detriment.
of American democracy?
mm.
Yeah, I mean,
Is the Supreme Court actually doing that? I mean,
sure.
is because there's been allegations that that's been true. Looking at some of the justices and some of the decisions that they've made, and and I'm asking the question because as a layman from the outside, it feels that way. But I'm looking for some substance, some yeah.
I mean, I'll jump in first and then let Dr. Tiggs kind of close the loop on this. But I will tell you that one of the things that's very scary about the Supreme Court is there was a time that the concept of stare decisis was that you actually had to have a case in order for them to make a decision. Now they're
Yeah.
getting to the point where they're making decisions without even having a case. And if that's the case, then you can only be making decisions based on policy agendas as opposed to legal arguments. So, one
Yeah.
of the struggles that you see with the Supreme Court right now is that they have turned into a court that has gotten to be a lot more active, which was not supposed to be their role. Their role was to be what I would call receiving and judging, as opposed to creating and instituting. And I think that's part of what's moving in the right direction. But the irony is, Dr. Blue, people talk about this conservative court. The Supreme Court has been stacked with individuals from Republican institutions and presidents for years. There's been a lot more Supreme Court justices that were appointed by Republicans than by Democrats. But the reason that we're having more of this conversation right now is this ideologued approach as to what we see happening in the judicial system that did not used to take place before. But that just feeds into what society is into right now. This whole idea of be what you want, wear what you want, say what you want, whenever you want. The courts are kind of following along with it.
So I want to turn our attention a little bit in terms of, again, somebody was asking, I think it was Zola, in terms of Project 2025 sounds, like or either that or Christian nationalism, one of the two, sounds like a right wing or sounds right wing. And yes, the reality is it is coming from the right. And one of the things when we talk about Project 2025 is the idea of this attack or this fight against this woke agenda, whatever that term means. And Dr. Pennycook, I know that you're as well as from a health perspective, you're also in academia in terms of academic leadership, and so this kind of attack on um, you, okay. Well, let me ask the panel because I don't want to make assumptions here. I want to inform our listeners. When the term woke agenda is evoked by the right or those who seek to um, push back against it, what are they talking about, and what is it in reality?
The way it's expressed currently, and the way it's expressed currently is that anything that will tend to say that American structures and systems were created and continue to be upheld to privilege a certain group of very specific people that have not only a specific way of thinking, but that have a specific way of looking and of speaking.
Mm,
And that is very generalistic in nature because we know that there are people in all expressions of races and ethnicities and genders and everything that think we don't move as blocks of people.
mhm,
We are all individuals who think our own way and express our beliefs in our own ways. But it's sort of like a generalizing of othering, saying that those that look this way, those that are saying that they have been mistreated, those are trying to convince our children that they are to blame for their suffering, and that's not fair. And what we need to do is then repel that by saying that is not true, that ideology is false. We are not to blame for what anybody else did. And then we, instead of feeling small and guilty and ashamed, we must feel empowered and strong and proactive in saying, we reject that. That is not who we are.
mm.
And we saw it coming. And I know that everybody here, I'm going to be like you and not assume.
Yeah.
But I believe that
Oh,
a lot of us here saw it coming when Mr. Floyd was murdered and there was this outcry of support and of protesting in regards to what happened there. We saw it and we said, this is going to be a small window of opportunity. The backlash is going to be, and that's what we're living now. So
listen,
what
panel.
what
Listen, I hate to
yes,
interrupt, but
yes,
I'm in a public location and I'm being asked to vacate the premises. I guess my agenda
Oh,
must be too woke. I don't know, but 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 thank you all for thank you for allowing me to be on the on. But I have to sign off now. But that was an excellent analysis. And one final thing on the woke agenda, right? I'm so sorry that little Johnny feels upset about my history, but I've been feeling upset my whole life.
mm.
Mm.
Well, so this is a good opportunity for us to take a quick break, and that way we'll be able to let you go, Dr. Blue. So, we'll be right back after this message. We're just going to reset for a moment. So, if you're just joining us, this is the public square, and we're in a very robust discussion right now about the state of the United States, and we've been looking at a number of angles um, and a number of topics and areas in which we're trying to ascertain where we are as it pertains to the United States. I have a very uh, uh, learned group of individuals who are joining us, and we'll be right back with them shortly. I want to thank you for your comments and your questions. Keep them coming. I want to encourage you to subscribe to our channel, subscribe to this program, The Public Square. You'll find it on the South Central Conference YouTube, Facebook page, as well as the South Central Conference website. We want to grow this. You can actually go back. This is our third season. We're on season 3, episode 5, and we have many of our programs that you can go back on the South Central Conference YouTube page and view those programs, as well as the South Central Conference website. If you go under the PAL, Web Public Affairs and Religious Liberty website, there you'll be able to see some past episodes where we've dealt with a number of different topics that may be of interest to you. So I want to try to bring our panel back because we we broke a little bit when we were talking about this idea of a woke agenda and the impact of that. And so I want to ask us to pick up from there. Dr. Tiggs, I know you are an educator also, and so this idea of what we can teach, what we can't teach. Um, d- Dr. Pennicook, you even talked about into this idea, and you while you didn't mention it, but this idea of a of critical
Critical
race
race theory.
theory. So tell us a little bit, Dr. Tiggs, what critical race theory is, what people with a particular agenda try to make it out to be, but what it actually is.
I mean, when you talk about critical race theory, in essence, you're talking about, and I'm just being very basic because this actually, critical race theory, surprisingly, amongst everybody, creates such a horrible debate, even among Black people, as to what it actually is. But at its roots, you're talking about this in depth analysis of the concept of race, and in particularly looking at the African American journey, its roots, its the systematic issues. I mean, it just covers so much. It's not easy to put in one quantified definition, but you're taking an in-depth look and study into that. It's almost like having Black History 2.0 as a class instead of U.S. history that removes Black people from it, and
Mm,
so the issue that we have in our country right now is the upending of all things race. So what our forefathers did and what our civil rights leaders like John Lewis, like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and all these people did in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, literally all of that is being essentially overturned. All of these laws, the goal is, if they could overturn the Civil Rights Act, they would do it yesterday. The goal is to basically upend everything that had been done in relation to race in relation to Black people enjoying the civil rights and liberties of all people because of what the Constitution was founded on, what it states, and the principles that it was founded on in this country. And this is a serious problem. That is why HBCUs are so important right now. And that is why Oakwood is very important, because not only is it an HBCU, but it's a Seventh day Adventist HBCU, which has a different type of history. Because when we look at it right now, according to Gallup, 56% of Blacks over the age of 40 have a negative view on what will happen for education for Black people after the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court, overturning it, which is alarming. And so people from millennials to Generation X to baby boomers, they are really concerned, because you're talking about, I look at my grandmother, she lived during the time of Jim Crow. She lived during the time of all of these things that were fought for, and she's still alive, and she's seeing that a lot of things that they had sat-ins for, they boycotted for, they fought for, that they were deprived of. She felt, okay, finally I can give it to my granddaughter, to my great granddaughter, to my great great granddaughter, and now she's still alive and saying, "Wait, what are y'all doing?" But then here's what's interesting, Pastor Courage, and I'm going to pass it to my colleagues, is that the younger generation have a completely opposite view. That same poll look at the people that were younger, the people that are currently in the educational system, you're 18 to 24, and they viewed them, and like over 60% of them didn't see anything wrong with the affirmative action decision at all. Matter of fact, they were saying that they were glad that it happened. So you have this dichotomy between two opposing views, but a same group of people. And so that's why it's important that people understand their history, understand what happened in the past, are knowledgeable on that, to show how that is going to shape the present and the future, in regards to them being in this country.
And that's the long game. And that, I think, is what we're trying to emphasize, all of us as educators. When a country wants to change its regime, it starts with education in elementary school and in entertainment. And that is how the views of the country are shaped in a way that, like they call it, bloodless civil war. So what we've seen in other countries is that they start with, oh, Pastor Goodrich is gone. I wonder what's
Yeah, no, yeah, go
you're
ahead.
here.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
That they start with education in elementary school, changing the way that students think about their countries and their rights and the Constitution and what laws are and what to vote for. And they will wait the 30 years until that generation gets not only to vote, but then to be in leadership. It will wait. And in one generation is enough to change the regime of an entire country just based on public education. So when we
Sure.
see things like the Project 2025 wanting to attack public education, there's a reason. The only way that some groups can be elevated to become meaningful in societies and change makers is through education. So if you're able to take that away from them, that you're able to make things happen without even having to fight, which is why we need to fight so hard that that does not happen. And I totally support what Dr. Burden said in regards to HBCUs. I think that's what we all have in common, Oakwood, and the importance of not only supporting it in name, but in making sure that it is providing the best education for our students so that they can then be ready to walk into this world the way they need to. Um,
And Paul, one of the things that's really, you know, troubling from a part of society as it relates to this whole, really social construct of race is that the willingness to believe that racism is embedded into the fabric of who we are as Americans from a political standpoint, from a legal standpoint, that's the part that really causes a large part of our society to bristle. The idea of having to believe that this is so deep in the foundation of who we are that we cannot talk about these issues in life without first willing to start with that being the foundation.
Hmm.
And I understand why that would be troubling to a group of individuals who would rather not talk about this anymore or act as though it just doesn't exist. But and I think one of the things that and I might be in the minority on this is I truly believe at the end of the day that I usually trust the decisions of the American people. And there will be a lot of people that will say, Orland, you're insane. And I said, well, if you really look at who we are from a societal standpoint, I think sometimes the U.S. population swings hard in directions, and sometimes they swing too hard. Because the same country that can elect Barack Obama twice could somehow elect Donald Trump, could then swing back and say, nah, I don't know about that, to end up, going with Joe Biden. It's a strange construct of how we see ourselves as Americans. But I usually believe in my heart that at the end of the day, Americans do want to get it right. But sometimes when you swing hard in some directions, the momentum can sometimes take you too far away from where I think you were hoping to end up. And that's where, from my perspective, trying to give the benefit of the doubt, that's how I see it. But I do understand why somebody would not want to understand the institutionalized aspect of what we see. My daughter is an attorney and she teaches law right now. And one of the things that she and I were talking about recently was a new court case that's coming out that's talking about, professors at certain law schools and other institutions are quote unquote, having affirmative action that's taking place as to why these African Americans or even women or people from the LGBT community or plus are being, hired at legal institutions. And the irony of it is that many of these individuals who actually were quote unquote, interviewed didn't even end up taking the jobs. But what the issue was is that there were certain individuals, in particular, there were white male professors who said, we didn't even get a second interview. And they're actually now complaining about the fact that they didn't even get an interview, as opposed to even the fact that would that have led to a job? And
Hmm.
and and so when you start looking at the fights that are starting to take place, there used to be a time when you say, you know what, I really need to find a case with really good facts before I move forward. But nowadays, people don't even think you need good facts
Hmm.
because they know it's such a roll of the dice that even with bad facts, you may
Yeah.
still get the result you're looking for. And I think that's part of what's going on in our society today, where the judicial system, being as activist as it is, now is playing more of a political role than it was ever supposed to do in the past. And that's part of what we're battling with right now.
Yeah. And I think the driving force of that is media. And I actually did a paper on that. When you think about the protest movements, when you think about civil rights movements, all these other movements, the power's there, the basic fundamentals are still there, but the one thing they didn't have was a camera phone that can go live and everybody in the world can view live actions of somebody taking a water hose and hosing them to death.
Hmm.
So now it's like, okay, there is a cop and he's white male, and then there's a black male and he has a gun pointed to him, and somebody on the street literally can put on their phone and go live on Instagram, go live on TikTok, go live on where all of any platform, and we're watching this live. And so I agree 100%. I think every entity of our government has now succumbed to this media blitz that has been a blessing but also a curse. I
Yeah.
mean, they're literally controlling the narrative on everything. And I'm
Yeah.
like, folks, that is why education is so important. That is why I tell my students, shout out to Nia, one of my schoolmates, that is why Oakwood is important, because we got to be in the classroom to say, look at the document, the Constitution. This is what governs. This is the highest law of our land. Do you know it exists? Do you know what it says? Look at what they're saying in Huntsville, Alabama, in Madison County, okay? Certain things they're implementing are for your bad. Do you know what they say? Do you know what these documents are saying?
Mhm.
Have them knowledgeable and educated so that they can go live. and say, okay, according to Alabama State Constitution, Section 3, Code 9, Line 2, I can do this, and you see them doing this to me. And so that narrative can be shifted. But right now, what's the most powerful is who controls the media narrative.
Hmm.
Which party, which person controls the media narrative. And unfortunately, we can't get to policies and procedures because people don't want to be educated. They will rather align with foolishness because it's popular versus align with education because it's factual. And so
Mm.
that's the age that we're in, unfortunately.
Mm, mm, mm. So, okay, so with that being the case, I'm now going to put you in a very tough spot, each and every one of you. You have the ability and the opportunity to be an advisor to the president, whichever president is elected. But you see, we've talked about the issues, we've talked about the problems, so to speak, we've talked about the challenges, but you have the opportunity to be an advisor to the president. I want you to take one or two of the challenges and propose a solution, a possible solution, a direction that we can go to help mitigate the problems or the challenges that we face. And so I'm stalling a little bit to give you a couple of moments to come up with the answer. Take one or two challenges that maybe we've talked about, maybe we haven't talked about it. You know, we could have talked about climate change and the debate when it comes to climate change. Some people thinking that there is no such thing as climate change or man-made climate change. And again, if you look at Project 25, a lot of it has to do with undoing all of the um, uh,
Provisions.
yeah,
Okay.
provisions and steps that have been taken to try to curtail climate change. And so I'm going to begin with you. Okay, yeah, Dr. Pennycook. Since you were last before, I'm going to give you the opportunity to go first. So
Yay. Thank you.
one or two issues, and as the presidential advisor, you have the ear of the president. What would you advise that individual to be able to mitigate the challenges?
First thing would be a recommendation to get people to read and think critically. It may not be the solution for today, but it has to happen if we're going to have a solid foundation for anything in the future. If we were able to read and think critically, then even whatever the media is saying, the narrative that wants to be out there would be met by a sort of questioning and thinking, okay, let me find out a little bit more before I go out and do A, B, C, or D.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that a lot of the people that are following groups blindly with agendas, they're doing it because they have not been asked to read or think critically. And based on a comment that Dr. Tix just mentioned, which is people do not want to learn. That is why I believe that would be the first thing that I would suggest get people reading. Um, that would be the first one. The second one would be access, and access in the widest sense of the word. And now I'm coming from the public health standpoint. If I was
Mm-hmm.
going to be advising somebody from the public health standpoint, access does not only mean everybody is insured. I'm insured by my job, and I am out of network in the state right beside my state.
Mm.
And if I need my child to be immunized to go to college and I'm out of network, my insurance and the fact that immunizations should be accessible to everybody does not grant me the opportunity to provide that to my child so that not only they are safe, but the all their classmates, the entire school, their community is kept safe. So true access to preventive health and true access to urgent, when we have this debate about persons coming from other countries, because there is no such thing. Being an immigrant and illegal, those two words should never go together. Worse, even the alien word. But when people from other countries enter this country in a way that is not the way that is the correct way, and they're here, and we are saying that someone has insurance and others don't, what we do not always understand is that the virus does not stop to say, hey,
Mm.
Pastor, were you born here in the US or were you born in the UK? Because
Yes.
depending on where you were born is how much of my virulence I'll inject it. That's not it.
Yes.
Diseases cover, they have no borders. We're the ones. Humans are the ones who create borders. Diseases don't know them. So if we are not careful in providing access to everyone who lives where we live, then everybody is vulnerable to the
Mhm.
same diseases, no matter how they got into this country, how long they've been here, and how much money they have. The difference lies in the outcome. Depending on how much money you have, you can escape the problems that are caused by the infection. You do have access to earlier care, more support that others may not. But the initial thing is for everybody. So those would be the two things that I would advise: reading and critical thinking, and real access to preventive and urgent health care.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Attorney Johnson,
Sure.
you're up. You're up.
I'm going to kind of dovetail on what Dr. Pennycook said, where one of the first things I would work on is and advise on is the immigration issue.
Mm.
We came very close to coming to a resolution on that issue, but for one party deciding to play a little bit too much politics in preparation for a national election, that I think that's close enough where we were that we could actually get that done. And I think that is one of what I would call the lower hanging fruits. But I think something on immigration from a foundational standpoint, I believe would change this country quicker than anything else. You know, it will start to deal to some degree with the racism issue. It'll start to deal to some degree with this pitting one group against the other. You know, that you who've come in later, there's something flawed about you and things of that nature. So I would have all guns blazing on coming to an immigration resolution, especially since there was already, a blueprint that really was ready to go. That, but for a few bits of foolishness, did not take place. So that would be one of the first things I would do. Secondarily, the other point that I would really press towards is the idea that we need to keep a clear separation of church and state. We have people who are running on the ticket now that there should be no separation of church and state. Some people are using that as their primary platform. And I think that it is important to remind our country that this is not just about Christianity. This is about all the religious groups that exist in this country. The opportunity to serve your God the way you see fit. Because Pew Research says that 80% of the world right now does not get to serve their God the way they see fit. If we
Mhm.
in the United States fall down on that particular pillar, then now we are going to be living in a world that actually does not believe in allowing people to determine how they would like to serve their God. And I
Mhm.
think us making clear that we're on the forefront of that particular dynamic from a United States perspective, and that there is no what I would call room for discussion, in my opinion, in that area. Those would be the two that I would start off with, that I think you might have the possibility of getting that done.
Okay. Okay. I just want to highlight a comment here. Let me just make sure that I can access. Is from Zora B. Question: Immigration. How about the issues that Americans, especially Black Americans, have to deal with daily? And
Oh,
so,
yeah, absolutely. But, with that thought in mind, at the last presidential debate, we had somebody that was talking about the fact that immigrants are
Black
taking
job.
black people's jobs, right?
Black
So
job.
all of a sudden, we now see the issue of blacks as it relates to immigration and even the perception of what are the jobs that quote unquote belong to a race of people. And
Hmm.
that in and of itself is something that we obviously are battling with every day. And that's why I believe if we can start to deal with the immigration issue in a formalized way. And one last thing, and I don't want to take up too much time, but the
Okay.
idea that we have to stop taking everything to the states. We are the United States of America,
Yeah.
not a confederation of states. We're
Mm.
almost talking about the fact that every 500 miles you drive, there are new rules and regulations
Hmm.
because you're crossing a new state line. We've got to get back to the point where we're making rules that actually are for our full country. And I think that's also very critical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Dr. Tiggs.
So I'll take a different approach from everyone else. I think one issue that we need to address is in regards to international relations, specifically our stance on what's happening around the world. I believe that we've been silent on a lot of key and pivotal issues for a lot of reasons. Some being money, some being who's in our country, who's not in our country, some dealing with who's in office, who's not in office. So I think we need to do a better job. I mean, right now, according to Pew, 61% of the other member states of the United Nations around the world think that America's doing a good job when it comes to peace and stability. But I think that we can do a better job in our stance on certain international relations concerns and issues and education as well,
Hmm.
which kind of ties into the immigration issue. Again, we're making decisions that I think are a lot of times money driven, and why I know that's how things have worked in the past. We need to be making some more policy decisions as well, because America is at the bottom on a lot of policy areas when it comes to international relations. I mean, if we just take child laws, for example, we are below like Ireland. Like it's terrible. And so we need to do a better job on that front. And then another piece I would focus on is education. I think one of the great things during former President Barack Obama's time was his focus and intentionality on education and access to educational opportunities on the collegiate level. And basically, all of that is going away. We are not educating from pre-K all the way up to postdoctorate. It's just terrible. And now with that Project 2025 trying to eliminate the Department of Education, eliminate loan forgiveness, eliminate access to public education, giving enforcing people to say, oh, well, we're going to give money to this school because they got the 10 Commandments and this other school doesn't, so we're not going to give money to them. It's going to be a mess, and we're going to be back into the era of segregation in schools, which
Hmm.
some states, by the way, still have on the books. We're getting back into this era where our children will not be educated, and that next generation of leaders won't exist because there will be no education. So I think that we need to do a better job. I think we need to have a clear agenda. I think we need to have more open access, and I also think that we need to make sure that people are properly educated, because education opens the doors for so much more in our country, and we need some work in that area.
Okay. Again, I want to respond to, or at least highlight Zora B. She said, immigration is a lost cause. Plus, many immigrants have access to proper health care that our veterans do not. I work for one of the insurance companies. Immigrants are fine in comparison to others. So that
I want
just,
to address that briefly, if I may,
mhm,
Pastor
please,
Goodrich. And
please.
that is why I mentioned real access. So the fact that you are able to walk into a clinic does not mean that you understand or that they understand your language or your culture. The fact that the clinic exists does not mean that you can get to the clinic. The fact that you have an insurance card does not mean that you have the knowledge or the money to buy the food or live in the neighborhoods where you can walk safely and you can have access to the proper nutrition or the water so that your child can grow. And In some cases, the lack of even understanding the language, even if you have access to the doctors and the medicines and the nurses, you can't be compliant because you do not understand what they're telling you, how often you should drink it, if you should stretch it out or not. So, access in its broadest sense is what we're talking about. Not only having an insurance card with your name on it or a clinic in your neighborhood. And I believe that I really do want to stress the fact that health does not look at nationality, and neither does disease, and that it is to our advantage to lift everybody up. I do believe that reform is necessary. I am totally with Mr. Johnson and what he said, and I do think that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. That there are ways where we can address all these different things that we're talking about together, and that is why presidents have cabinets, and they do not only have one advisor, and that is why there's a House with all these people and Senate floor with all of these people. We can come up with strategies that help everybody, but at the foundation of it, things that everybody should have access to are education, are health. Because if we cannot comprehend and understand what's happening around us, and we're not able to be productive because we're not healthy, then there's not a lot more than we can do.
Okay. Well, with that, I want to thank each and every one of you. I also want to thank Dr. Blue in his absence. Thank you for this discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Not only that, but I hope that our listeners were informed and inspired to go out and read, go out and find out, research what Project 2025 is all about, research what is happening in terms of the Supreme Court, research what the candidates or the parties are standing for. And let me just say, we have an election. Make sure that if you are eligible to vote, make sure that you vote. If you know somebody else who is eligible, make sure they go out and vote. If you know somebody who is eligible but has not registered to vote, and it's not too late to register to vote, help them to register to vote. The only way that we're going to make meaningful change, if change is what we want, is
Yes.
to actually make it happen in the ballot box. Um, that's the last line of defense. Education is the first line of defense. Actually, making your vote count. That one vote, that's the last line of defense. And so, Dr. Tiggs, Attorney Johnson, Dr. Pennycook, thank you so much for joining us in the public square. And we'll be right back with this closing thought.
Thanks for the invitation.
My goal in each and every episode is to inform about issues that affect our everyday life, to inspire my audience to action, to integrate faith principles in what we discuss, and to ignite meaningful thought around issues. And I hope that we've done that this evening. I want to thank you for joining us. We're working on a show for next month. It's going to be a different day. It's Thursday, August the 15th at 7 p.m. Instead of the second Thursday of the month, it's the third Thursday of the month. And we're going to deal with the state of the church. So today we talked about the state of the United States. Next month, we'll talk about the state of the church. Again, thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to our channel. Please, you can find us on Facebook, South Central Conference YouTube page, Facebook page. Subscribe to the Public Square. You can go back and watch previous episodes. You can go back and watch this episode if you joined us late. Share it, share the link, let somebody else grab a part of the discussion. And I want to thank you for spending your time with us. And again, I'll see you next time in the public square.